Hello there. My name is Andrew Krop with White Bear PR, and welcome to our very first episode of GAMETRAX, where I get to geek out with some exceptional guests, video game composers, and talk about one of their favorite video game soundtracks, or, as I like to call them, game tracks. Unfortunately, we're unable to play licensed music during the interview, but we have included a link to this episode's game tracks in the description box below if you'd like to listen along while we chat. Today, I have the immense privilege of chatting with one of my favorite video game composers of all time. He may be most famous for his award-winning scores to the classic PS3 game Journey, which debuted on the Billboard charts higher than any video game soundtrack in video game history, and also was the first video game score to ever be nominated for a Grammy. His other credits include scores for The Banner Saga, Abzu, Assassin's Creed Syndicate, and most recently, John Wick Hex and the PS4 interactive live-action game Erica, for which he won a Gang Award. Upcoming, you can hear more of his music in The Pathless, as well as the video game musical Chorus. I am very pleased to introduce GameTrack's very first guest, Austin Wintory.
Thank you for having me. I wasn't prepared for that. I thought it was just going to be like, "Hi, let's go." So I'm very, it's very generous. Now I have to somehow sound deserving of.
Oh no. Yeah.
But you're very kind, and honestly, I'm thrilled to be here to chat about this because growing up, I was a gamer before I was a musician. So for me, the inevitability of working in games, at least in hindsight, seems clear. Probably wasn't actually inevitable, but I always had these two loves that were seemingly on a collision course, and so geeking out about game scores is arguably more second nature to me than writing music. So I'm very happy to do it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming and chatting with me. We're very honored to have you, honestly.
The honor is mine.
So, Austin, which game tracks have you chosen for us today?
So it's funny because it's a tough question. I have landed on the answer that I tend to traditionally offer if anyone says, "What's your favorite game score ever written?" There's 50 that could make that list, but for me, Peter McConnell's Grim Fandango, which was the apex of the point-and-click adventure 90s sort of tour of duty that LucasArts had,
Yes.
and Tim Schafer and Ron Gilbert and Peter McConnell was one of this kind of illustrious trio that was in-house at LucasArts in the 90s and the late 80s of he, Clint Bajakian, and Michael Land. And the three of them together, did these classics of the Monkey Island franchise, The Dig, Full Throttle, Maniac Mansion, Outlaws, and
the golden age of LucasArts.
Yeah, for sure. Which for me, I came of age as a gamer playing those. Part of the reason why I love Grim Fandango is it's the culminating point of a string of games that for me coming of age represented this education on the potential of games. I looked at those and the storytelling, the artistry, even the humor, which is kind of unusual about games in general, especially back then. It was one of those that it broadened my horizons of what they can be. And Grim Fandango, immensely. I'll never forget from the first time I played it, which was in high school, the moment that so for those who don't know this game, you play Manny Calavera, who is basically a Grim Reaper, but in the kind of sarcastic comedy world that it takes place in the Mexican land of the dead. They refer to them as a travel agent to the land of the dead. And the whole thing has that kind of, Orwellian doublespeak. And the game's world is this collision of all the traditional sort of folkloric representation of the Dia de los Muertos from Mexico in tandem with this amazing 1940s Art Deco film noir aesthetic. It's like, imagine that civilization advanced up to the point of the Art Deco within the land of the dead.
Yeah, I believe they took a lot of the influence from the old film noir and like Casablanca.
Undoubtedly, yeah.
It's like Casablanca meets Coco in a way.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah,
Like some Tim Burton thrown in.
Completely agree. And so the premise is that you play um, this Grim Reaper, this Manny Calavera travel agent to the land of the dead, who's really down on his luck and can never get good clients. When people die and they lived crappy lives, and his ability to kind of usher them into the final afterlife is really hampered because they don't qualify for any of the good packages for traversing this 4-year journey. And then the intrigue happens is that he gets this client who the system tells him is only qualified for, you know, the lowest possible package. But when he researches the life that she led, and her name, by the way, is Meche Colomar, Mercedes Colomar, but they call her Meche. She was basically a saint. She was like the world's most perfect person. You know, she grew up helping the poor and never earned any income and was, you know, just like a perfect friend and all these things. And she was just supposed to be this like cartoonishly flawless human being.
Like simply pure.
Yeah. And so he can't understand why she doesn't qualify for the single best package, which is, you know, the express train that skips the entire 4-year journey on the number 9, and it takes you directly into the afterlife. And so he starts doing some digging, and he discovers this whole crime ring, and that's where the whole film noir thing really speaks, is that they discover there's a bunch of like really bad people that are bound for hell that are trying to figure out how to game the system, and by sort of stealing the fates of these really amazing people. And so you go off and you have your adventure. And anyway, that's a long-winded way of setting up that the moment I'll never forget playing the game, that was one of those watershed moments for me on that games can really genuinely be a serious art form. And there were plenty of games that you could name before Grim Fandango that are equally sort of signposts in the road towards greater artistry. Right. This was just the one that hit me at the right point in my life. I was a teenager, and it just really struck me was when Meche first shows up in the land of the dead, and Manny cuts open her sort of like weird casket thing, the sort of strange egg almost that they show up in, and it's like a sack, and he cuts it open, and she says, "You're not the nurse." and he says, "No, but I am here to ease your pain." And she says, and then she looks down, and it, like, you see this moment, even in this very simple animation, you see the moment of she didn't realize she was dead, and she goes, "Oh, I guess they couldn't save me." And it was just like
it's the storytelling is just so brilliant in it. There was really nothing like it.
Absolutely not. And very few games had world-class talent voicing the characters prior to that. These actors, it was one of those moments that I was like, wow, I've never played a game where I'm instantly that empathetic with a character within 2 lines.
Right. How would so Austin, how would you describe the music in it? Because I know it pulls from a lot of Latin folklore, but there's also jazz and big band.
Yeah, so that's the thing. Because of the 2 stylistic influences of the game, namely the Mexican Dia de los Muertos and then the sort of classic Hollywood 40s film noir, the score is those 2 things. So you'll have, like, in one moment, this spectacular, you know, mariachi trumpet solo, and then you go into the greasiest, nastiest tenor saxophone solo.
Yeah.
And it kind of dances back and forth, and he draws some other influences from Central America, because there's some things that kind of feel reflective of, like, leaning a little Aztec, less modern Mexico, more kind of pre-Columbian, and so there's little dabbles of that in there, but it's really rich. And the other thing is 1998. Basically no video game scores had live human performers on the
and I actually think I read that Peter McConnell used musicians in the score that he either knew or connected with in the Mission District of San Francisco, which is like, I can't recall many scores that used live musicians back then.
No, it was very rare because the technology just didn't support it. The games couldn't play back. They couldn't support file types like that. They couldn't support file sizes like that. You know, you have to remember that, you know, these on a CD, you know, I mean, it's like, you know, there were a ton of limitations, and the implementation to CD-ROM was kind of like the tipping point that suddenly made this start to become possible. And then immediately another one of the challenges became, well, we don't really have the budget though, because no one ever thought to budget that much for music, because it just was never even an option to begin with.
Right.
You pay the composer for their time, and then that's it. You're done. There's no additional cost. And but to LucasArts' credit and Peter's credit, yeah, he went and found a bunch of performers essentially on the street from San Francisco, and not just there though, but he played a bunch of it himself. He's a fantastic violinist. And, you know, the other folks like Clint Bajakian's a guitarist, and I'm sure he's surely playing a bunch of the guitar stuff in the score. And then another thing that I love is there's a bunch of prominent bass clarinet, and he went and got the guy that played with Tom Waits.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know that.
Part. Yeah,
that's so cool.
And when you listen to it, when you go back and listen to it knowing that, it makes sense, because you're like,
because it's
not
so
an
good.
Ordinary musician. Like, that's a really stylish bass clarinet, and that's just not a normal sentence.
I would say, especially out of like 1998 was such a big year for video game music in my mind. Like, you have Koji Kondo's Ocarina of Time, and Grant Kirkhope did Banjo-Kazooie. And I think that's the year the original StarCraft came out, and Metal Gear Solid, and like all of these franchises launched. I think out of all of the great music that came out of that year, like, if you sat someone down with Grim Fandango, with all of its like jazzy big band noirness, I don't know if they'd be able to tell if it was a video game soundtrack.
Oh, I think you're right. I think that it is a little window into that moment where, because games were so defined by the 18-bit and 16-bit sounds that their hardware necessitated, the notion of video game music was like this kind of pejorative to describe beeps and boops, you know. And it only the gamers, the kind of underground society of gamers, realized how much compositional brilliance was happening within that incredibly narrow, like, hardware handcuffs that these people like Koji Kondo were working in. And the achievement compositionally that they managed is baffling. But this was one of those that broke free. I think you're right. I guess I'm basically just saying the same thing as you, is that there's nothing about it that would have made people fall for the false claim of, oh, that's just video game music, as if that should be diminutive in some way. Because it didn't sound what to their ears would be like, oh, it's just sort of cheap synth stuff.
Right. So you obviously love this game. I love the game too. The soundtrack's incredible. Do you remember what it was? I think I remember what it was like booting this up, but do you remember what it was like the first time you experienced Grim Fandango and like heard that music on the start screen?
What I remember, the funny thing is that my first memory is that line of Meche. That was the moment, because I loved all these LucasArts games, so it was like I just got it because I got them all. Like, up until that point, I would have said Full Throttle was my favorite game ever made.
Absolutely.
And that's the only game I ever played with my dad, and he went and bought a Harley Davidson because of that game. Like,
oh my gosh!
So we really loved Full Throttle in our house, and
it was very popular in between my brother and I as well.
Yeah. Oh well, good. Kindred spirits. I didn't even realize. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So that was so. The thing that I remember was that, you know how like Pixar always has a short film in front of their films. That's kind of like part of the memory of that movie is the unrelated short and how good or not it is, and most of them are amazing.
Yeah.
The thing that I always like remembered was the skeletal version of the LucasArts logo. Just like that little touch to say that, you know, we've committed to this game on every level.
Right.
That even there's like a proprietary version of our corporate logo at the beginning. That's for some reason always stuck in my head. It's kind of like those moments where, you know, it's easy to scoff at corporate branding as like a very kind of cold whatever, but
Yeah.
done right, it's magic, man. Because think about like the first time you see the silver wavering text over Lucasfilm pictures before
Right.
a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, text shows up. Just the LucasArts.
Yeah, you knew you were getting quality when you saw LucasArts back then. It was like no joke.
So yeah, that LucasArts. Although I do remember, I should say, if I remember correctly, I do remember thinking that isn't the home screen like the ashtray with the of smoke coming off the cigarette, because that's very memorable to me. That's something beautifully atmospheric.
Back when cartoons could smoke.
Probably, could they? They probably couldn't, but this was like,
maybe by the 1980s. Yeah, it was pretty edgy. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, the whole game takes place after death. You know, if you're playing with kid gloves, that alone would be enough to disturb you. But yeah. So anyway, that's kind of my fractured answer to your question. Is there's a handful
that's great
of things, but yeah.
Yeah. Do you have, just as a final question, do you have any particular tracks from the soundtrack that people should check out that are like your must listen tos?
I mean, the whole thing, it really is so special. The tango, that's the love theme for Manny and Meche, which is called Manny and Meche on the album, is just glorious. But the one that for me may as well be the main theme because it encapsulates the game so well, because it's basically just a big band tune, but it's just so great. It's called Casino Calavera, which takes place about a quarter of the way into the game when we transition into the second year of the 4-year journey, and we see him. It's a little montage moment where we see him mopping the floor of a little diner, and then cuts to 1 year later, and he has built it into this thriving casino. And you know, what starts off as him wearing an apron and mopping a thing, he comes out and he's got his white press suit, and he's like flirting with the bellhop, and it's just like a lot has happened that we skip past, and the piece is just kind of like updating us as quickly as possible that he's Johnny Cool now. And
it's wild. It's such a good track. I agree with you.
The whole thing. Peter is just a very, very good composer. You know, he and every now and again, kind of like Elfman Burton or Spielberg and Williams or Franklin Schaffner and Jerry Goldsmith, there are these partnerships where they seem to really.
They're just golden.
They just really, yeah. The Tim Schafer. It's like people have asked me before, who would be your dream game developer to work with, and it's like I would love to work with Tim Schafer, but Peter has to be dead or incapacitated before I'd be willing to do it. Because as a gamer, I need to play a Tim Schafer game with Peter's music in it, and I would never want to work with Tim knowing Peter's available. It would just feel wrong. And I don't think that would ever happen anyway. Tim's very loyal to Peter, rightfully so.
I mean, hey, Tim, give Austin a call.
No. I mean, and to be fair, I've worked on 2 different games with Double Fine, so I got to work with Tim enough. In fact, one of my dreams of my whole life was after we worked on this, it was a little Xbox game called Connect Party that Tim was sort of trying to make for his daughter, basically. He said, I want to find a way to make the Xbox Connect not make my daughter cry. So he decided to make his own Connect game that's kind of a kid's thing. And I wrote about, I don't know, there were a couple composers contributing to it, including Peter, but I can't remember. I think I probably wrote about half of the score. And so Tim, one day he called me and said, would you like to come up to San Francisco? Double Fine, I don't know if they still do it, but at the time they were doing a podcast called like Double Talk or something like that.
Yeah.
That was maybe once a month or once a week or something like that. Where their community director at the time, Chris Remo, who's also a composer and a very good one, known for like Firewatch and Gone Home,
Right.
he would basically sit and chat with whoever. And so Tim said, I'd like to do a music episode about Double Fine music. So he said, why don't you and Chris and Peter sit and talk about music? And I was like, what do I belong at this party? I did half of one little thing. So I flew up to San Francisco just to do this podcast, and I'd never met Peter before. And it was like, this is the most exciting thing that has ever happened in my life.
That's amazing.
And so, yeah, we got to sit there and geek out about game music on their Double Fine podcast for a couple hour, an hour or whatever. And
so cool.
It's amazing. So yeah, I feel like my bucket list with regard to Double Fine, I couldn't be any more greedy than I already have been.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you, Austin, so much for joining us today and bringing back Grim Fandango. There is a remastered version out there that has all new music they recorded live. You should check it out.
The orchestra. Yeah,
if you haven't already. But yes.
Actually, and wait, I can one up this one last way. I just realized I should have had it handy before we started, but I don't keep any you can see over my shoulder here. I've got a painting of Jerry Goldsmith next to a painting of Leonard Bernstein that my girlfriend made, but I don't keep posters of like my past work or anything like that in my studio here. I like to keep this room very neutral, but the one giant exception, of course, it's not that it's from my work, but the one kind of clear exception to the blank canvas nature of this space I do keep this on the wall here in the studio.
Oh my gosh.
And this was also made by my girlfriend. I'm realizing that you're getting the reflection of the computer screen, which is like creating this infinite loop of the painting.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, that looks pretty good.
Manny and Meg did it together. Yeah, my girlfriend is an artist.
That's so cool.
So yeah, Manny keeps an eye on me while I'm working.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you for sharing that, Austin.
Yeah, well, thanks for giving me an excuse to.
Awesome. Well, once again, thank you for joining us. And for the rest of you, thank you for tuning in. I am Andrew Krop with White Bear PR, and this was our very first episode of GameTrax. If you'd like to check out the original soundtrack for Grim Fandango, once again, we have a link that you can click in the description box below. And if you would like, please subscribe to White Bear PR channel so that you can keep up to date on our latest composer interviews and shows. Have a great week and enjoy the GameTrax.